Thank you for holding this very important hearing. I'm no stranger to discrimination, hate speech, or threats of violence against my family and myself simply because of my identity. As a Black, visibly Muslim woman who came to this country as a refugee, I have dealt with racist, xenophobic, bigoted comments and threats.
All right, everyone, buckle up, because this isn't just another political back and forth, it's a head-on collision between identity, patriotism, and the elusive promise of the American dream. At the center of it all stands Ilhan Omar, the Somali-born refugee who defied every imaginable barrier to rise to the halls of Congress, and yet remains one of the most divisive figures in modern American politics. She doesn't begin with slogans or statistics, but with something far more vulnerable, raw emotion. She speaks of discrimination, of relentless hate, not as a politician seeking sympathy, but as a Black, visibly Muslim woman who has carried the weight of judgment in every room she's entered. Her words cut deep, forcing listeners to confront uncomfortable truths buried beneath America's ideals. But the backlash is swift and unforgiving. Critics claim that every time Ilhan Omar speaks, she doesn't lift America up, she tears it down. They call her rhetoric divisive, her passion unpatriotic, her criticism proof of contempt. And it's in that collision, between love and disillusionment, between belonging and rejection, that this story truly begins. Because at its core, this isn't just about one congresswoman's struggle. It's about a nation still asking the same haunting question: who really gets to belong in America?
I've got to get a reaction from both of you about what Congressman Omar says about being an American. Watch.
Something that I get criticized for all the time. It's not what you think, so don't don't gasp. It is that I am anti-American because I criticize the United States. As an immigrant, I probably love this country more than anyone that is naturally born.
Candace.
I can't think of a single comment, and you can feel free to correct me, that any of them have said positive about America or Americans. They're here asking for radical reform on the basis that this country is fundamental.
As Ilhan Omar rises to defend her identity, the tension in the room grows thick, almost electric. Every word she speaks is dissected, twisted, and weaponized by critics eager to paint her as ungrateful, a woman, they say, who despises the very nation that gave her refuge. Commentators rush to the cameras, voices sharp and unforgiving, repeating the familiar refrain: if you hate the flag, you don't deserve to stand under it. Conservative pundits seize the outrage, turning it into spectacle. One host even declares, Ilhan Omar and her allies don't belong here, branding her as the face of a so-called rising radicalism threatening America's identity. But Omar doesn't flinch. Her response lands with quiet power, cutting through the noise with conviction. She reminds the nation that her love for America wasn't inherited by birth, it was chosen through sacrifice. I came here because I believed in what this country claimed to stand for, she says, her voice unwavering. To her, patriotism isn't blind loyalty or silent gratitude, it's holding America accountable to its own ideals, freedom and equality, not just for some, but for all. And in that belief, she stands taller than ever, embodying the paradox of a nation still struggling to define what it truly means to belong.
And here's what's problematic about the way that they're conveying their messages. They're actually falling into really bad stereotypes of what it means to be a person of color in this country. A really bad stereotype about Black Americans is that we're gangbangers, and that we're ignorant, and that we threaten people and we're violent. We have Ayanna Pressley tweeting to Kellyanne Conway, "Hi, Becky." Remember that racist pejorative that the media roundly ignored? Right. "Hi, Becky," if I called you Becky. Imagine if you called me Shaniqua. What would the media response be to that? And she said, "Keep my name out your mouth." Could you, think about this. A congresswoman speaking to someone like that. Congress is not Bloods versus the Crips, okay? It's Republicans and Democrats.
The debate quickly spirals into a storm of accusation and conviction. Candace Owens, the fiery conservative commentator, strikes first, accusing Ilhan Omar and her allies of viewing America as a nation beyond redemption. Her words are sharp, deliberate, and meant to wound. Owens argues that their constant calls for justice disguise something deeper, a mindset that divides rather than heals. By framing minorities as perpetual victims, she contends, they only reinforce the very stereotypes they claim to fight. This isn't a street fight, Owens snaps. Congress isn't Bloods versus Crips. It's supposed to be about solutions. But to Ilhan Omar and her supporters, patriotism isn't measured by silence or comfort, it's defined by courage. To them, loving America means confronting its darkest truths and demanding that it live up to its promise. It's not about protecting flaws, it's about pushing the nation toward the ideals it was built upon.
thing that can make Americans feel like we are working towards a solution in this country. These women are doing the opposite.
They believe that America is an evil, racist, corrupt country at its core, and it must be completely remade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In congressional hearings, the minority party gets to select its own witnesses. And of all the people that Republicans could have selected, they picked Candace Owens. I don't know Miss Owens. I'm not going to characterize her. I'm going to let her own words do the talking. So I'm going to play for you the first 30 seconds of a statement she made about Adolf Hitler.
Tensions finally boil over when Ilhan Omar refuses to back down. Instead of retreating, she flips every accusation with sharp precision, turning defense into defiance. She challenges the idea that dissent equals disloyalty, declaring that confronting America's flaws isn't betrayal, it's the truest form of patriotism. Her words strike like a lightning bolt through the chamber, shaking the comfort of those who prefer silence over scrutiny. To her critics, her defiance is proof of arrogance, even contempt for the nation's core values. But to her supporters, it's the mark of integrity, the courage to demand that America live up to the ideals it was founded on. What follows is no longer a debate, but a collision of worldviews, one clinging to tradition, the other calling for transformation. And in the eye of that storm stands Ilhan Omar, polarizing, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. Her very presence forces the country to face an unsettling question: is patriotism about protecting power, or about pursuing truth?
I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist. But if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German.
All right, so my first question is to Ms. Hershinoff. Ms. Owens said, quote, if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. So when people try to legitimize Adolf Hitler, does that feed into white nationalist ideology?
The hearing reaches a boiling point when lawmakers turn their focus.
The hearing erupts when lawmakers turn their attention to Candace Owens, pressing her to explain her past remarks about Adolf Hitler. Her controversial statement, implying that Hitler's actions might have been acceptable if he had kept it within Germany, sends a visible shockwave through the chamber. Gasps ripple across the room as disbelief turns into outrage. For Ilhan Omar, this isn't just political theater, it's a moral crossroads. She seizes the moment, transforming what could have been chaos into clarity. With calm precision, she exposes how dangerous rhetoric, when left unchecked, can desensitize a nation to hatred and embolden extremism. Her words shift the focus from partisanship to principle, from ideology to conscience. This isn't about left or right, she insists, it's about right and wrong. Her warning lands like a thunderclap: white nationalism isn't a ghost of the past, it's a force resurfacing in plain sight. The exchange ignites headlines and floods social media, etched instantly as one of the most explosive and defining moments in recent congressional history.
It does, Mr. Liu. I know that Ms. Owens distanced herself from those comments later, but we expressed great concern over the original comments.
Great, thank you. So there's been a lot of talk today. I like to focus on actual policy responses that our government can do to try to mitigate the threat of white nationalism. I know that in my district in Los Angeles just last month, 2 swastikas were painted at Pan Pacific Park along with a trail of blood. I met with Jewish constituents in my district who mentioned that at their synagogues, they've all had to increase.
The debate grows sharper, the atmosphere in the chamber thickens. Lawmakers wrestle with a fundamental question: where does free speech end, and where does incitement begin? Candace Owens's rhetoric hangs heavy in the air, forcing an uncomfortable reckoning. The conclusion that emerges is chilling in its simplicity. When hate becomes familiar, it doesn't just echo, it recruits. Ilhan Omar listens in silence, her expression unreadable yet resolute. The irony is not lost on her. The girl who once escaped the violence of Mogadishu now stands at the epicenter of America's political unrest. Her mere presence disrupts the narratives her detractors cling to. They brand her as divisive. She calls silence the real source of division. When she finally speaks, her voice carries a steady calm that cuts through the noise. Patriotism, she declares, is not obedience. It's courage, the courage to demand that this nation live up to its promises. To Omar, love of country isn't about protecting comfort or power. It's about confronting truth, even when that truth makes the powerful uneasy.
You know, there is a nonprofit security grant program at the Department of Homeland Security. Do you believe it'd be worthwhile to increase funding to that program?
The ADL has, for establishment reasons, First Amendment reasons, been very cautious and wary of government funding to religious institutions. That being said, we well understand the fear and the safety. So I think that is something that has to be done very carefully in terms of what entanglement. I know in the place in Westchester County where I live, the state and local governments provide a great deal of protection to the synagogue.
The conversation drifts into territory few in the room are ready to face, beyond policy, beyond party lines, into the raw darkness of a nation haunted by its own reflection. Reports flood in of playgrounds defaced with swastikas, of children asking why symbols of hate are carved into the places they once felt safe. Lawmakers describe synagogues transformed into fortresses, churches guarded by cameras, and Muslim families too afraid to gather for Friday prayers. Ilhan Omar listens, then rises, her voice steady but heavy with lived experience. She threads these stories together into one unflinching truth: hate has no loyalty. Once unleashed, it spares no one. Her call for equal security funding across all houses of worship isn't a partisan demand. It's a plea for humanity, a cry for the simple right to exist in peace. She doesn't speak from theory or distance. Her words come from the dust of refugee camps, from nights when fear was constant, from threats that still follow her even now. To her, this debate transcends politics and religion. It's about survival. It's about dignity. It's about the unshakable right of every person, in every faith, to bow their head in prayer, without fear.
I do understand, and I would like to work more with Congress, but I want to caution about where we entangle. This is a very difficult thing to do, because when we're scared like this, of course we want money.
So that is a great point you make, and I want to know that this program would apply to mosques as well as synagogues, so it is not specific to the religion. But it is true, the First Amendment does affect all these issues, including, for example, private sector companies to say whatever it is that they want. Now, I'd like to also talk about a second program, and this was one that I asked Ms. Clark about, and it has to do with the Trump administration wanting to cut a very specific office called the Community Relations Service Office in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Can you first explain to American people what that office does and why it would be a bad idea?
Her closing words land not as rhetoric, but as a quiet declaration of faith, not just in God, but in the fragile, unfinished idea of America itself. Ilhan Omar reminds the chamber that democracy is not preserved by comfort, but by courage. That freedom is not inherited, it is practiced, defended, and renewed by those willing to question power and demand justice. The hearing room, once charged with division, falls into an uneasy silence. For a fleeting moment, even her harshest critics seem to recognize the weight of what she represents, a refugee who fled fear, only to stand before the world and confront it again, this time armed not with escape, but with conviction. In that moment, she is more than a congresswoman. She is a mirror, reflecting back to America its greatest contradictions and its greatest hope. A reminder that the promise of liberty is not a gift given, but a responsibility shared. And as she takes her seat, the question she leaves hanging in the air lingers long after the cameras stop rolling: can a nation built on freedom ever truly be free, if courage becomes a crime?